It wasn't just a horror movie, it was a birth announcement from hell. When It's Alive premiered in 1974, audiences didn't know what to fear, more the razor-clawed mutant infant on screen or the deeply unsettling questions the film raised about science, parenthood, and what we choose to keep hidden. On the surface, it's a story about a newborn that slaughters doctors in the delivery room. But underneath, it's a cinematic ultrasound of America's growing panic in the face of genetic manipulation, pesticide use, and medical overreach. The film's director, Larry Cohen, wasn't just telling a monster story. He was dissecting a national anxiety, one that no one wanted to name. The result? A film so controversial that its marketing campaign was pulled from theaters for terrifying pregnant women, and so viscerally real that it made audiences question if what they were seeing might actually be possible. This wasn't the work of a major studio looking for cheap thrills. This was an indie provocation, shot with guerrilla tactics, using practical effects that made every scene of violence feel far too tangible, too close to home. And maybe that's why it stuck. Because It's Alive didn't just ask, what if your child was born wrong? It asked, what if your society made it that way? These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about. It's Alive, a film that crawled out of the womb and into our collective nightmares. Fact Wahid, the poster that got banned. There's only one thing wrong with the Davis baby. It's alive. That tagline, paired with an ominous baby carriage under a spotlight, was all it took. The promotional poster for It's Alive was so psychologically jarring that multiple theaters refused to display it. The image wasn't graphic, it didn't need to be. The implication of unseen horror struck a nerve, especially with pregnant women and young families. Reports began to circulate of expecting mothers experiencing panic attacks after seeing the ad. Medical professionals voiced concern. Public outcry followed. Warner Brothers was forced to pull the poster from wide circulation, replacing it with a more neutral design. But the damage, or perhaps the genius, was already done. The controversy fueled curiosity, and the film developed a cult following even before its general release. Was it a marketing blunder or a calculated act of provocation? Larry Cohen never apologized. In fact, he doubled down, claiming that if an ad didn't disturb people, it wasn't doing its job. Ironically, a poster that was banned for being too scary might have been the most effective horror campaign of the decade. Fact Ithnan, the monster baby that almost didn't exist. The terrifying baby in It's Alive is now considered a cult icon, but during the original production, it barely existed. Larry Cohen initially planned to shoot the film without showing the creature at all. The horror would be implied, heard in screams, seen in aftermaths, never directly shown. It was a budgetary choice as much as an artistic one. Midway through filming, Cohen changed his mind. He felt the film needed a physical manifestation of fear. Enter Rick Baker, the now legendary FX artist who was hired to design the mutant infant in just a few weeks. Using latex, foam, and mechanical wiring, Baker created a grotesque newborn with flaring nostrils, sharp teeth, and twitching limbs. The baby only appears briefly in the film, but those moments are unforgettable. Baker later admitted he found the concept psychologically disturbing, far more than the monsters he worked on for An American Werewolf in London or Men in Black. In a twist worthy of the film itself, the most iconic element of It's Alive the Baby was an afterthought, and it stole the whole damn show. Factrice, shot without permission, inside a real hospital. You'd think a film about a mutant infant would require permits, closed sets, and medical advisors. But Larry Cohen had other plans. In true guerrilla filmmaking style, several hospital scenes in It's Alive were filmed without permission, inside real operating room. Cohen and his team posed as a documentary crew, bringing in actors, props, and lights under the radar. They shot quickly, often in the early morning hours, trying not to attract attention. Nurses and doctors occasionally wandered into frame, mistaking the shoot for an actual educational video. In one case, a security guard nearly shut them down until Cohen convinced him they were filming for a medical training series. This guerrilla method wasn't just reckless, it was effective. The sterile, institutional feel of real hospitals gave the film a haunting authenticity that no set could replicate. The audience couldn't quite articulate why the scenes felt so real. Now they know. And here's the kicker. Some of the hospital staff didn't find out they were in a horror movie until months later, when they saw themselves in theaters. Fact Sue, a script written in fury. Larry Cohen didn't write It's Alive as just another monster flick. He wrote it in rage, a direct response to the rising paranoia around overpopulation, drug contamination, and the chemical poisoning of daily life in the early 70 seconds. The script poured out of him in a matter of weeks, fueled by news reports about birth defects allegedly linked to pesticides and pharmaceutical side effects. The Davis baby, in Cohen's mind, wasn't science fiction, it was social backlash made flesh. A child twisted not by nature, but by the failures of systems meant to protect us: medicine, government, even parenting. This subtext was so deeply embedded that some critics dismissed the film as too political for horror. Others lauded it as visionary. Cohen never clarified, but his personal journals describe It's Alive as a film about a society that creates monsters, then punishes them for being born. Which raises the question, was the baby the villain or the victim? Fact: Khamsa, banned in several countries for moral panic. While It's Alive did manage a US release, other countries weren't so forgiving. The UK, Ireland, and parts of Scandinavia banned the film outright upon first review. Censors cited concerns about public morality, mental health risks for expectant mothers, and disturbing implications about childbirth. In Ireland, religious groups even staged protests outside cinemas that planned to show the trailer. Australia demanded heavy cuts. Germany initially refused classification. Even in the US, some theaters pulled the movie after complaints from parents' groups. The idea that childbirth, traditionally sacred, hopeful, could be portrayed as a scene of massacre was simply too much for many audiences. And yet, years later, the same film would be studied in university courses on reproductive politics and bioethics. Funny how horror has a way of aging into relevance once the panic wears off. Fact: Sitta, a real-life tragedy nearly halted filming. Midway through production, tragedy struck. Actress Sharon Farrell, who played the mother in It's Alive, suffered a devastating personal loss. Her real-life partner died suddenly in an accident just days before she was set to film the climactic breakdown scene the moment her character loses control, begging to protect the mutant infant from execution. Farrell was given the option to postpone, but she insisted on filming. What followed was a performance so raw, so emotionally unfiltered, that crew members were left speechless. Her screams, her trembling, the look in her eyes, none of it was acting. It was grief, bleeding directly into the frame. Larry Cohen kept the take. He later said, "That wasn't performance, that was cinema bearing witness." In that moment, It's Alive stopped being horror. It became heartbreak disguised as genre. Fact: Sebera, Warner Bros., dumped the film, then changed their mind. When Larry Cohen finished It's Alive, Warner Brothers didn't know what to do with it. Executives were unimpressed. Some called it too weird to market. Others dismissed it as a low-budget oddity that wouldn't play well outside of niche horror festivals. The studio shelved the film, quietly releasing it in a handful of second-rate theaters with almost no promotion. But something unexpected happened. Word spread. Small audiences began showing up, then bigger ones. Critics started noticing. Within weeks, the film had outperformed several of the studio's high-profile releases without posters, trailers, or even a full ad campaign. Warner Brothers panicked in a good way. They pulled the film from circulation, rebranded it with new marketing, and gave it a second launch a year later. This time, It's Alive exploded. The irony? The studio that tried to bury the baby had to resurrect it because the public refused to let it die. Fact: Themania, the delivery room scene was too real for some. One of the most infamous scenes in It's Alive is the birthing sequence, a gruesome, chaotic moment where doctors are torn apart by the mutant newborn moments after delivery. Shot in stark lighting with minimal cuts, the sequence was designed to mimic medical training footage. Cohen wanted realism. He got more than he bargained for. Several early audience members, including a handful of pregnant women at a test screening, reportedly fainted. One had to be carried out of the theater. A few moviegoers thought it was a real emergency broadcast at first. Even some projectionists complained, refusing to run the reel without a warning label. What made it worse or better was the use of genuine surgical footage blended with prosthetic inserts. Cohen later admitted, "We didn't fake everything. Some of it, we just filmed as it was." When fiction looks like fact, horror hits a different nerve. Fact 9. The sound design hid a secret cry. There's something deeply unnerving about the cries of the Davis baby in It's Alive. They're not human, not animal. They exist somewhere in between, a distorted wail that echoes through empty rooms and rattles nerves. But most viewers don't realize what they're actually hearing. Cohen revealed in an obscure interview that the baby's voice was created using recordings of real infants, played backward and layered with cat shrieks and slowed-down pig squeals. The result is a sound that triggers instinctive discomfort, especially among parents. What's more disturbing? Buried in the mix is a faint whisper of a woman sobbing taken from an outtake of actress Sharon Farrell breaking down between takes. Cohen decided not to remove it. He felt it added a layer of mourning. It's not just the image of the baby that haunts, it's the sound of something that never should have lived and is angry that it did. Fact: Ashra. The film was blamed for a real infanticide. In one of the darkest chapters of It's Alive's legacy, the film was cited during a real-life court case involving a young couple who had abandoned their newborn shortly after birth. The defense attorney claimed the father had seen the film just days prior and was mentally disturbed by its message, convinced that his own child might be born deformed or dangerous. While the judge rejected the argument, media outlets ran wild with headlines, "Killer Baby Movie Linked to Real-Life Horror." Religious groups demanded bans. Cohen, when asked for comment, said, "We don't blame Shakespeare for every jealous husband." Still, the incident cemented the film's status not just as fiction but as cultural scapegoat, and it reignited a chilling question. Can horror films influence reality, or do they simply reflect the fears we've already refused to face? Fact 11. The baby's eyes were human, and they moved. Most viewers assumed the mutant baby in It's Alive was just a rubber puppet, lifeless, stiff, artificial. But if you look closely in certain scenes, especially during its final moments, you'll notice something uncanny. The eyes glisten, they dart, they seem aware. That's because Larry Cohen insisted on using real human eyes, not prosthetic ones, for a specific close-up shot. The team built a special prosthetic head with holes in the sockets, and a crew member crouched behind the model, peering through. His eyes were lit just enough to reflect off camera, giving the illusion of life beneath the latex. The result? An inanimate monster that felt disturbingly sentient. But here's the kicker. Those were the eyes of Rick Baker, the special effects artist himself. So, in a way, the creator quite literally gave life to the creature and stared directly at the audience through it. Faktithna Asher, a scene too disturbing for television. When It's Alive was prepared for television syndication, the studio was forced to cut or soften several scenes. Blood was toned down. Screams were muted, but one scene in particular was flat out removed. The moment when Frank Davis finds his mutated baby hiding in a milk crate, trembling, looking up at him like any frightened child. There's no violence in the scene, no gore, but test audiences found it psychologically unbearable. The emotional whiplash of empathy for something so unnatural was too intense. A few even described feeling guilty for sympathizing with the creature. Network execs feared public backlash and quietly removed the scene from TV airings for over a decade. Sometimes, it's not the horror that disturbs people, but the unwanted empathy. Fact: Thalathat Aresher. The film was inspired by a true scientific controversy. Though it feels like pure fiction, It's Alive has disturbing roots in real medical scandals. During the early 1970 seconds, reports surfaced linking the drug thalidomide to horrific birth defects in Europe and parts of the US. Babies were born without limbs, with fused organs, or severe deformities, all due to a supposedly safe drug given to pregnant women for nausea. Larry Cohen was reportedly haunted by the images in medical journals. In interviews, he admitted that the moral ambiguity surrounding these events, corporate denial, government complicity, and public confusion became a seed for his script. The monster baby wasn't a demon. It was a metaphor for failed science and the cost of blind trust in medicine. And the most haunting detail? The thalidomide tragedy was still fresh in public memory when It's Alive was released, making the horror feel all too real. Fact: Arba'atu Asher, a soundtrack that whispered dread. You might not remember the score of It's Alive, but it remembers you. Composed by none other than Bernard Herrmann, the legendary mind behind Psycho, Vertigo, and Taxi Driver, the film's soundtrack is deceptively quiet, sparse, almost hesitant. Herrmann avoided traditional horror crescendos or shrieking violins. Instead, he used low, pulsing woodwinds, eerie lullaby motifs, and sudden bursts of silence. The effect wasn't to scare you in the moment, it was to leave something inside you unsettled. Few viewers realize that the main theme is a distorted inversion of a classical cradle song played in reverse intervals. A lullaby designed to soothe, turned inside out to unnerve. The real horror wasn't what you saw. It was what followed you after the credits rolled, when the melody refused to leave. Fact 15. The baby's name was never revealed for a reason. In most horror stories involving children, names matter. Damien, Rosemary's Baby, Regan. A name gives identity power, even innocence. But in It's Alive, the mutant child is never given a name. Not once. Not even by the parents. According to Larry Cohen, this was deliberate. He believed that giving the child a name would humanize it too much, forcing the audience into sympathy, diluting the larger metaphor. The baby wasn't meant to be a character. It was meant to be a consequence. Interestingly, early drafts of the script had the mother whispering a name Christopher in one deleted scene. It was cut after test audiences reacted with too much emotion. So the baby remained nameless, a thing, a curse, a mirror, and perhaps that's what made it unforgettable, because no name could soften what it represented. Fact 16. Larry Cohen filmed without a permit, again. You'd think that after sneaking into hospitals, Larry Cohen might play it safe. But no, he doubled down. One of the film's most iconic moments takes place in a Los Angeles storm drain, where the baby is cornered by police and its father. The scene is tense, shadowy, and dripping with paranoia. It also wasn't legal. Cohen and his crew entered the public works tunnel system without a permit, filming at night and praying no city workers showed up. They used flashlights, handheld cameras, and a skeleton crew. The film's climax, which looks like a meticulously designed set, was essentially stolen from the city. Ironically, the lack of official lighting and setup gave the scene its raw, documentary-like intensity. Viewers assumed it was stylized. It wasn't. Sometimes guerrilla filmmaking doesn't just save money, it creates nightmares that feel far too real. Fact, Sebrata Asher. The father's breakdown wasn't in the script. John P. Ryan's portrayal of Frank Davis, the father torn between societal duty and paternal instinct, is one of the most chilling elements of It's Alive. But his most memorable scene wasn't planned. Near the end of the film, when Frank cradles his monstrous child and begs for its life, Ryan broke down on camera in a way that wasn't in the script. He stammered, wept, and held the baby prop as if it were real. Crew members stood frozen. The camera kept rolling. Director Larry Cohen later revealed that Ryan had tapped into a personal memory, the sudden death of his own child years earlier, something he'd never discussed publicly. That grief bled into the scene, raw and unrehearsed. What was meant to be a cold, clinical moment became a devastating collapse of emotional boundaries. The line between actor and character vanished, and the monster, for a moment, became a son. Fact 18. The sequel was greenlit before the first film took off. While It's Alive gained momentum slowly through word of mouth, Warner Brothers made a surprising move. They approved a sequel before the original became a box office hit. It was a rare gamble for a horror property that had started as a low-budget oddity. Larry Cohen pitched a second installment before the first even finished its limited run. He envisioned expanding the mythology, more babies, more government conspiracy, a broader metaphor for genetic control. The studio was skeptical, but intrigued enough to say yes. By the time It Lives Again hit theaters in 1978, It's Alive had already reached cult status. The sequel explored more political themes, but lacked the intimacy and shock of the original. Still, the early greenlight revealed something Hollywood rarely admits. Sometimes, the weird ones do survive, and they breed. Fact 19. A Catholic group tried to reclaim the film as pro-life propaganda. Years after its release, It's Alive was unexpectedly embraced by an unlikely group, a Catholic pro-life organization. They claimed the film was a misunderstood parable, not a horror story, but a warning against abortion and eugenics. In their view, the mutant child symbolized how society demonizes the imperfect, how fear leads to extermination, and how even monstrous life deserves protection. They screened the film at private church events, distributed pamphlets quoting dialogue out of context, and even contacted Warner Brothers to request endorsement rights. They were declined. Larry Cohen was baffled. "I didn't make a message film," he said, "but I guess if you stare at the monster long enough, you'll start seeing yourself." The most terrifying thing about It's Alive may not be the baby, but what people choose to project onto it. Fact Arsharoon. The final line was changed after a test screening. In the original script, It's Alive ended with a bleak, clinical report, a radio voice listing the baby's death as contained, with authorities declaring no further threat remains. But during a test screening, Larry Cohen noticed something. The audience wasn't scared, they were satisfied. And that, to him, was a problem. So he rewrote the ending. In the final cut, just as the parents believe the nightmare is over, a new voice crackles through the police radio. There's been another one born in Seattle. That single line, just 7 words, reframed the entire film. What was once a closed-loop horror story became an open-ended epidemic. The monster wasn't unique. It was a symptom. It could happen again, anywhere. That one sentence did more than just set up a sequel. It planted dread in the audience long after the credits rolled. Because if it could happen in Seattle, why not in your town next? Bonus fact: the film was dedicated to an unborn child. Few people noticed the dedication at the end of It's Alive. It flashes briefly, almost cryptically, in the credits. For MLC, no explanation, no context. Years later, Cohen revealed that the initials stood for Margaret Louise Cohen, the name he and his wife had chosen for a child they lost during pregnancy. The film, a terrifying meditation on broken parenthood and society's fear of imperfection, was, in part, a grief ritual, a way of mourning something that never got to live, something that, like the creature in the film, was real only to those who loved it. In the end, It's Alive wasn't just about a monster. It was about what we fear most when we lose control of what we create. What do you think? It's Alive really was a monster movie, a political warning, or a private scream from a grieving father? Tell us in the comments which fact stayed with you the longest, and what other forgotten films you'd like us to dissect next. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because some stories were never meant to be buried.